All right, we are live and that's working. So Katie?
Good afternoon. I'm going to why don't you call the meeting to order,
Okay.
and then we'll do it back, switch back.
Okay, are you going to call the roll, see who's present then, or do we have that?
Yes, we'll do roll call, please. Jennifer, can you help assist in that, please? This is the Land Preservation Board meeting, April 19th, 2021.
And members, when I call the roll, please say present via Zoom and the location that you're at. Bears?
Sort of here somewhere.
Byers, is that what she's?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, he's not, he left, so I think he's trying to get back in.
okay.
Chandler? Don't see him. Dargis? Don't see him. Foster?
Lois Foster on Zoom from Niles.
Township?
Berrien Township.
Thank you. Hinkleman? Is he? No.
He's not there.
Kretschmann?
Here, present, County Administration Building.
Krieger?
Here via Zoom in Coloma Township.
Marski?
Here via Zoom, Shoreham Village.
And Schinkel?
Here at the Administration Building, Orinoco Township.
All right, we have 6 present and 3 absent.
Okay, so being we do have a quorum, I'm going to call the meeting to order at this time. And first item of business, I'm going to turn it over to Katie for the election of the officers.
Okay, under our bylaws for the Land Preservation Board, we are required to appoint officers each year at our first meeting. Since this is our first meeting of getting together for this year, we have the positions of chairperson and vice chairperson. The current chairperson is Ed Kretschmann, and our vice chairperson is Lois Foster. I would ask if there's anybody entertaining an interest or would like to make a nomination. I would take that at this time.
I vote that we nominate the same two.
Okay,
Support.
okay. Is there any further discussion?
Was that Marski that supported?
Yes. Okay, I guess I should also ask, is the chair and vice chair, are you willing to continue the position? If so, voted in or elected?
Yes.
I need to
Okay.
do a roll call vote. Katie?
Yeah, that was just a discussion question, just to
Oh,
make sure
sorry.
they were. Okay, with that, let's do a roll call, please.
Now I do show that Don just entered. What location are you at, Don? You're on mute. Can you unmute, please?
I'm trying to get unmute. Don Byers, can you unmute for us? Star 6. There it goes. Nope, nope. That might need to come back, Jennifer.
Okay. Chandler is absent. Dargis is absent. Foster?
Yes.
Hinkleman is absent. Kretschmann?
Yes.
Krieger?
Yes.
Marski?
Yes.
Schinkel?
Yes.
We have 5 yeas.
Okay, with that, I pass it over to the chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Next item of business is the approval of the minutes for November 13th, 2020.
I move that be accepted as presented.
Support. Foster.
Okay, it's been moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Oh, you have to do roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Aye.
I thought I was running a different meeting.
All right. Byers, are you on there now?
You should be able to. It shows that he's unmuted, so I'm not sure what is going on there.
Okay. Chandler is absent. Dargis is absent. Foster?
What are we voting on now?
Accepting the minute.
Oh, I thought we did. Yes. Sorry.
No, I got ahead of
Engelmann
myself.
is absent. Kretschmann?
Yes.
Krieger?
Yes.
Marski?
Yes.
Schinkel?
Yes,
And we have 5 yeas.
Okay, minutes are passed. At this time, correspondence, Katie?
Yeah, I'll just only share that, I know in our my last email correspondence or update to you was just giving you the results of the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, their PDR application funding round. I just thought I would only highlight that it was well received in the sense of, we did, this was our first application that we submitted, under the PDR program, and although it didn't get funded, we were encouraged and there was good feedback from the ag preservation staff person on ways for us to improve for the next funding cycle, and I would just highlight just a couple things again in that from where we lacked in points was simply just our program design. Some aspects in our program that I think over the next year we can certainly try to improve upon. We did acknowledge or get some points in almost all areas, with exception to, we got the minimum points for our commitment, and obviously we also did receive some matching funds. That's through the support of the actual applicants. But on the part, so there was, if you recall, in the program, there's kind of 2 areas of concentration for points, and it's on the program side and then also on the actual parcel and activity side. And our parcels in general, and I think kind of having learned and from discussing with other communities and as well, is that our parcels will always score very well, I think, in Berrien County, just by the nature of the land that we have, its uniqueness, its recognized agricultural, we have good soil, good land. We're on the west side. We have the fruit and specialty crops. So I think we'll always fare well on the parcel side, with the exception of, if the applicant participates in other programs such as the MAPE or the conservation plan, those types of things. But where we can improve upon is just some things with education on behalf of all of our board members, and trying to encourage more community participation, and some other planning tools such as the agricultural economic plan. And those are things I think that as we update our county master plan and some other activities or projects that are going parallel with what we're doing, I think those will help increase our points going forward. So that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. Any questions for Katie? Seeing none, thank you, Katie. At this time, are there any public comments to be made?
Is there anything on?
I will go and check. Nope, I'm the only one, so you're good.
Okay, all right.
And this was advertised. I heard it at the county board of commissioners meeting, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Very good. Old business, I see none. So that leads us up to new business. Is our speaker online?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Is there?
So I'm going to turn this over to Katie to do, you have the introduction.
Sure, yeah. So I'm happy, one of the things that also came out of our communication with the Michigan Department of Ag was an introduction to Brian Bordage, who is a member of the Ag Preservation Fund Board, but also has many other hats, and I think I sent you kind of his bio, so you have a little bit of familiarity of his background, but he is here with us today to kind of just give us some perspective and discussion on areas generalized from the support for how his role with the American Farmland Trust as a consultant, and also his experience and expertise with all aspects of farm preservation and ag preservation, conservation easements. He's going to be with us today to share his knowledge and also be able to hopefully respond or answer some of your questions, dire needs, and kind of position ourselves as we move forward. Because I think, although we don't have a land preserved through the PDR program, I think we're moving that direction. And so this is a great time to kind of gather our thoughts and be ready to take some steps forward. So with that, I'd like to introduce Brian Bordage, and I'll let you go from there. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Katie. And thanks to all of you. I'm really happy to be able to be here today. I know that Katie shared a little bit of information with all of you about my work and my background. I think if you read that, you gleaned that I grew up in Allegan County, and while I've been working in the Traverse City area for more than 20 years, I have a deep love for Southwest Michigan and certainly your county and its importance, which I want to talk about in a minute. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with American Farmland Trust. American Farmland Trust is a national nonprofit organization. We're just starting our 41st year of existence. Its general mission is to preserve the land that sustains all of us, and that means central to that mission is supporting the protection of farmland, but also all of the things that that we like to call farmland protection plus. So those things that either support the protection of land that's already protected, or are helping people to access land. More and more work on things like regenerative agriculture and agricultural practices that are healthier for our soils and water and all of those kinds of things. So we're known by many around the country for our tremendously successful No Farms, No Food green bumper sticker campaign. So when you see a No Farms, No Food bumper sticker on somebody's car, that's American Farmland Trust. So I'm happy to be working for them now for nearly 2 years as a dedicated consultant to help advance farmland protection in Michigan specifically, but I do work with a larger Midwest and Great Lakes team too. So, so I'm happy to be here. I want to say first, per your brief discussion about the Agricultural Preservation Board, I am a gubernatorial appointee to the board, have been for a number of years. So I want to thank you, first of all, for taking the time, effort, and commitment to organize yourselves and to submit an application. As Katie knows, and I want to make sure all of you know, the board is working very hard to look at how we can do more to be supportive of those local entities like Berrien County who have not yet had the pleasure of any number of successful preservation efforts. So we have a set aside established now in our policy of a small amount of our grant funding to be allocated only to those people who are working on their first, one of their first few projects. And we're looking at other ways that we can help you. So from the board's perspective, and certainly from my personal perspective, I was really delighted to see applications from Berrien County. So I want to thank you on behalf of the whole board for being another community that's making that effort. I don't know if Katie explained to you, but we are woefully underfunded relative to demand. And unfortunately didn't have any funding for a number of years because of problems with the way that the fund is structured in relation to PA 116. But we should continue to have a minimum of about a couple $1 million going forward. And we certainly encourage you to continue to submit applications. Katie has a great mind about how she can make some improvements on your projects. And so I just want to let you know you have a cheerleader certainly in me for that work. So and also I want to talk a little bit about your location, because not only being familiar with the lakeshore from growing up and driving to any number of places to enjoy the lake, and you know, I grew up in Plainwell. If any of you know where that is, it's right on M89, so it's a straight shot to the lake, and depending on which way you might turn, you know, any number of locations along the lake, including St. Joe and Silver Beach and all those kinds of areas in your county that are enjoyed by me, but also in my work up north, where we have the good fortune of having long established farmland protection efforts. One of the things that has come up repeatedly is that it would be so fantastic to be able to address funders like foundations, others, and make different kinds of efforts that address the entire West Michigan fruit belt. You know, we've been really fortunate in the Grand Traverse area to have the Leelanau Conservancy, the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy, the Little Traverse Conservancy, three of the oldest land trusts in the country, and certainly in the state, doing farmland protection work and all sorts of land protection work, but including farmland. And then also, as many of you may know, one of the oldest locally funded programs in on the Old Mission Peninsula in Peninsula Township, and then not too many years later in Acme Township across the East Bay. So we have two locally funded programs, which is not the norm in Michigan, but that have been enormously successful. So it's always been a strong interest of mine to see more activity in Southwest Michigan along the Fruit Belt and West Michigan as well. So I'm really excited to see the activity in Berrien County because it is such a key piece of the West Michigan Fruit Belt. A couple more things about that, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but back in the year 2000, American Farmland Trust released a report called Farming on the Edge. And it was a very specific report that wanted to identify the most important agricultural areas in the country and what was sort of their relative position in terms of risk, et cetera. And one of those that was identified was the West Michigan Fruit Belt. So the area along the Lake Michigan shoreline from York County north to approximately Emmett County was identified as one of the top 20 most important and most threatened agricultural resources in the country, going back to more than 20 years now. And then in our most recent work, which was released last year, a project called Farms Under Threat, we did a much deeper analysis of farmland at the national level and the state level and identified what we called nationally significant farmland based on its productivity, its versatility, and its resiliency. And there's some materials that Katie can share with you about that. But if you look at Berrien County, you'll see that the vast majority of all of the farmland in the county is identified as nationally significant. So that means not only do you have a lot of farmland, but that it's not, and not only is it important to the state, but it's important on a national level under that analysis. So just some things that I think are important for you to be aware of in terms of, the position of the county relative to other resources in the state, and that I think that doesn't go unnoticed. Sometimes I think people outside of the state actually pay a lot more attention to the fruit belt, and it's important as a specialty crop growing region than sometimes we do in our own state. And perhaps that's becoming less true now that that we have a different kind of balance between manufacturing and ag, and not that the loss in manufacturing has been a good thing, but I think it's drawn more attention to how important the agricultural sector is and how unique Michigan is with its resources, and of course its proximity to the lake. So I just wanted to share those things with you in terms of my thoughts about the importance of the land in your service area. A couple other thoughts. I really want to have a lot of time for questions and answers. So, one of the things I wanted to make sure that you understand from my perspective, having been able to look at programs like those underway up north on the Old Mission Peninsula and the like, is that some of my mentors really schooled me in thinking about farmland protection as a key planning tool, with the goal being the strengthening or retention of a long-term business environment for agriculture, right? We're not just doing this because farms are nice and we'd like to see them when we drive down the road, right? They're what we see repeatedly, and certainly I see firsthand up north, is that when you start to have a number of protected farms in a given area, you see a certain vibrancy and resiliency in agriculture in that area, because the land is, those growers don't have to worry about the threat of development next door all the time anymore. So they tend to make more investments in their farm. They tend to diversify their farm operations. And the supports for agriculture tend to stay around, whether that's producers or, you know, any kind of other business supporting them. And increasingly, we're seeing more and more attention on our local and regional food supplies and those systems. I think COVID has really made people much more aware of how precarious some of our food supplies can be. And so I think as we continue to talk about farmland protection, there's a way to talk about it as, you know, really the factory floor for all of that food production that's going to make a regional or local food system work. The other thing I wanted to just mention is that in all of the time that I've been working with the federal farmland protection programs that are available through the NRCS, which go by any number of acronyms, depending on which farm bill you're talking about. But most of those that are active in farmland protection in the state of Michigan are also working very hard to pursue those dollars, because they're much more significant in a typical year than what we have through the Ag Preservation Board at the state of Michigan. So that's something that I've mentioned to Katie, and something that you may want to look at as you know, another opportunity to pursue. And it's a challenge, like a lot of other federal funding sources, but you know, we've been working successfully with the program since it was created in the mid 1990s. So, so that's you know, another opportunity that's being readily utilized by folks throughout the state. There's not necessarily a magic bullet for how we do this. Unless you're in New England and you've lost so much farmland that as a state you decide to pour, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars into protecting what's left. But you know, absent that, which you don't necessarily want to see happen here. You know, most of those folks that are being successful in protecting farmland are using any number of tools together. So that's sort of just my introductory comments, and I want to make sure to give you some time to pepper me with any questions that you have. I've done this work at every level, from working with farm families at the kitchen table to talk about their options, up and through doing federal policy advocacy work. So I'm happy to do anything I can to answer your questions and have any kind of discussion that might be helpful for all of you. So thanks.
I have a question. Growing up, Berry County, and even today, is kind of a tourist mecca for the fruit and so on. But we're becoming less and less diversified. We're moving away from peaches, moving away from apples, plums, and pears, and those kind of things, and being very heavy on other things like grapes and so on. Is that something that can be a concern or not?
Well, I think it's a very interesting observation. It's not unlike some of the trends that we're seeing elsewhere in the fruit belt, including in our region, right? I mean, I just saw the other day in an article that there's 26 wineries on the Leelanau Peninsula alone now. And I think when I started working there were 5. So, you know, it just kind of was mind blowing to me, right? How much we've seen some of these sectors grow. But at the same time, I'm seeing some diversification that I think certainly there's that piece and how it relates to agritourism, but also we have a lot of growers that are moving essentially away from processed fruits back to fresh fruits. in some cases with a lot of success. So a couple of the growers I know have really moved significantly away from both cherries and apples for processing, and back into, for example, dark sweet cherries, hand-picked for the fresh market, as challenging as that can be with labor and the like. And also more production of apples for the fresh market, particularly in high density plantings, right? So whether it's Honeycrisp or any of that sort of family of highly desirable fresh fruit, we're certainly seeing people that are making some of those shifts, and that includes some, shifts away from things that once were, highly sought by Gerber, for example, or other producers, and just are not nearly as financially viable anymore. So, I think the question, I think your question was about, is it a concern? I think it's only a concern if the pendulum swings so far the other way that you have, you don't have a sort of net gain of diversity in terms of how people are able to generate business on from their farm operation. So I think it's important to pay attention to, and to look at, what's working and how you might be able to encourage folks to strengthen their businesses through some level of diversification.
Thank you.
Brian, apparently our policymakers in Washington and Lansing aren't as concerned about this as we are. Otherwise, there'd be a means, a monetary means for us to do something about it.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't think Washington, but I guess I can personally editorialize for one moment and just say, I don't think Washington, regardless of your political affiliation, has been too much concerned with things that affect most of us for quite a while. So, it's a terribly unfortunate thing. That said,
yeah, I agree with that.
I like to focus on what we do have, right? And one thing I would certainly encourage you to do if you have time, and I will make sure that Katie gets this link, is just the other evening, our president of American Farmland Trust, John Piatti, has what he calls free range conversations, typically once a month or every couple of months. And Secretary Vilsack, who will be our new ag secretary, or our returning ag secretary, was the guest. And it was an hour-long conversation that also took questions from the audience around the country. There were about 6,000 people on the call. And I could not have been more encouraged by the conversation. And, I've had the experience of working through, several folks at the federal level in the Department of Ag, and can say that I saw some really great gains during the time that Vilsack was in service previously, which I think was during both of Obama's terms. And part of it is because he comes from Iowa, so he's got cred with the farm community. He understands rural agricultural America in a way that I think a lot of other ag directors have not. And he understands the relative importance of our agricultural resources, not only for all the things that we might care about them for in sort of one sort of paradigm, but also in terms of its importance to the strength and vitality of rural America. And then the other thing that I think is just really fascinating about that conversation was that he really sees agriculture as early and easy winners under the right sort of opportunities in terms of dealing with efforts to sequester carbon and do other things, that are being asked of folks and businesses. And in part, that's because we're learning more and more, and AFT is doing this research all the time about how even the simplest of changes in practices can affect soil health and affect carbon sequestration. So the example I like to use, because it's easy for me to remember, is that if you're essentially, if your primary activity is row crop production of, say, rotational, corn and soybeans and those kinds of things, that simply converting to a no-till practice and appropriate cover cropping can turn your operation from one that emits carbon on an annual basis to one that sequesters it. So that's just one point that stuck with me. But the other is that the thing that I'm most encouraged about is that we saw a lot more directives sort of coming down the pike to make staff much more flexible and easier to work with at the NRCS and other agencies during Vilsack's tenure. So I'm excited about all of us that are working regularly with that federal farmland protection money that I talked to you about and other programs, and that, I know nothing moves fast with the feds, but that we did see improvements when he was in that chair before. So I'm hopeful on that front.
Well, shifting to Michigan, the PA 116 program that's supposed to finance what we're doing, it doesn't.
That's
So
right.
What could they do to change that?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that you might not realize this, but because of the change in the law that established the need for entities like yours to be created in order to access farmland protection dollars. So before that, as a component of PA 116, a farmer could apply directly to permanently protect his farm with a conservation easement. But what happened when they changed the law in 2000 was they realized that that was a really willy-nilly sort of approach to protecting farmland. It wasn't organized and it wasn't locally driven. And so I think, your voices are heard at the table, and we have a unique situation where I think Katie can attest to this to the degree that she's participated, but since Director McDowell was appointed, he's attended in person every single one of our ag board meetings. So, we have direct access to the director, we have access, through, and then our chair is the president of Farm Bureau, Carl Bernarski. So I think, there's nothing wrong with you guys advocating for additional funding, and certainly the maximum amount of funding that's available on an annual basis to be made sure that it's available through the Ag Preservation Fund. But, it was sort of sinful that we went as many years as we did with this construct that really was not working at all. There was no surplus to protect farmland permanently through PA 116. So, we made a great stride in getting around that hurdle, but I think the next one is and there are a number of ideas, just, I don't want to vet all those, but there are some really creative and great ideas that have been floated. And mind you, people are doing this all over the country. So there's a lot of states to look to for other, places where there's been some consensus around how to fund these things that could be added to mechanisms to draw money into the Ag Preserve Fund. So,
Yeah,
I mean, I couldn't agree more. As a board member, it's very frustrating to see any program, not get funded when, and even to know that a lot of people aren't submitting the backlogs of applications they have because they know we have very little money, right? So the real demand's even more than what you're competing against, because a lot of people just are choosing not to apply to the Ag Fund because they know there's so little money.
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I wanted to say is that, again, my job's not a political one. I don't really care who it is that I'm working with if they want to listen and talk about ways we can advance things. But, we're going to have probably for some time Senator Stabenow as the chair of the Senate Ag Committee again, and likely writing the new farm bill. Remember, she created the specialty crop block title, the specialty crop title in the farm bill. She's done she's a huge champion of the conservation title. And, we've gotten a lot of work done with her in collaboration with lots of other legislators on both sides of the aisle. So take advantage of that, let her know what it is that you would like to see. Because I can tell you our policy team is already starting to prepare for the next farm bill. I mean, it seems crazy, but basically as soon as the farm bill passes, those that work in policy work are starting to get ready for the next one, right? So 5 years is a long time, but it's not that long of a time when you think about those kinds of
Goes by in a hurry.
So that's another thing to think about, and not any of your legislators for that matter. So.
Brian?
Yeah.
When you talked about the demand out there, in my mind, it always seems like when you show a politician there's demand, they will act on it. Do we know, kind of just off the top of your head, how much demand to preserve farmland is there in the state, and if we know that, how can that be leveraged then to advocate for increased funding?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, part of the problem with answering that question is that we don't have the streamlined system that other states do, where, for example, every single county would have a farmland board that was collecting applications, right? So some of the best things we can do is look at things like what was the demand for federal dollars on a given year, because that's such a bigger marker than the state funds, but also what was the demand to the state ag preservation fund versus the money that was made available, right? I mean, we're collecting that data on a national level and often at a state level through American Farmland Trust. So I'm glad you asked that, because it's something that I've been wanting to get. We used to regularly get those figures for Michigan from the NRCS, and our NRCS manager for the federal, what we call now the Agricultural Land Easements Program, is a great guy. He's been in that chair for, almost as long as I've been doing this work. His name is Brian Thomas, and he works out of the Lansing office. And so he has those stats, right? How much was requested in federal money versus how much was available by allocation at the state level, et cetera. And then again, we can obviously do that at the preservation board. I think we had 13 total parcel applications this last round, of which we only were able to fund 5. So, but I can't remember the numbers without looking, I'm not looking at that chart. But we regularly have at least 2 to 3 times, our request is typically 2 to 3 times the amount of money available. And what's particularly frustrating about that is that those requests only represent, a portion of the value, right? Just like in your application, either the landowner and or other resources are providing some of that match as well. So it's not only a loss in that we're not able to get those projects completed, but there's essentially an offer on the table to make some sort of a gift to the state that's lost. So it is a frustration always. I mean, not enough funding is a constant frustration. And the places where we've seen that mitigated to date have been those places that have been in a political position to adopt, some sort of local millage for farmland. But we only have that in one at the county level in Ingham County in the state of Michigan. All the rest of those programs are, well, I shouldn't say that because I suppose Washtenaw County through its association with the Ann Arbor Greenbelt program, I think does have a millage at the county level, but it includes parkland as well, which is great, I think. But most of the other programs that are township by township and in pretty unique circumstances, right? I mean, if you know the Old Mission Peninsula, I mean, it's one tiny shore away from being an island. It's a pretty peculiar place with, a pretty remarkable legacy. My favorite stat I've ever learned about the peninsula is that in its heyday, its tart cherry production was the equivalent such that if you counted it as a state, it would have been the 4th largest producer of tart cherries in the country. So, that's pretty crazy, right? But what I can say is that where we see success, Ingham County is a great example, Peninsula, Acme, all of them, where they have established millages and they ask for a renewal, they almost universally pass, and typically by much larger margins. That happened in Ingham County when they extended their millage, Acme Township when they extended their millage, Peninsula Township twice when they extended it and increased it. So, and that, again, that's not paying the whole price, right? But it gives those communities significantly more leverage for these other resources.
Brian, what
Yes.
what kind of enthusiasm or help or interest do you have from Michigan Farm Bureau on this subject?
Well, I'll tell you, if you know Farm Bureau, it's a real ground up entity, right? And politically speaking, I want to say for about as long as I've been doing this work, pretty much every single year, their policy booklet has called for more funding at the state level for permanent farmland preservation, along with a slate of other things, right? So and what I've been seeing, certainly in my own experience in working, not only in the Grand Traverse region, but in other areas of the state where I've been getting to know folks like yourselves, is more and more local Farm Bureau chapters who want this, they want more resources available for this tool. And one of the reasons of which we haven't talked about is that it can be such a crucial tool for succession, because we have the first generation that's experiencing a radical departure from farmland value and development value on most all of the farmland in our, in any given part of the state, right? I mean, we didn't have to have these same kind of concerns in previous generations about what was going to happen with all of our agriculture. That's not also accounting for, not as many kids returning to the farm, et cetera, et cetera. But the big issue is, that the baby boomers represent, you know, the largest transfer of wealth in America. To the degree that wealth's a part of a farm family and tied up in land, you know, it's got to move. It's going to move. It's going to transfer, right? And without more tools, you know, in the past, I think we could take it for granted because farmland values didn't change very dramatically, and it either changed hands in the family or in the neighborhood. And, you know, people didn't have to pay a whole lot of attention to it, but it's a much bigger challenge. So I see that as changing a lot of attitudes at the local Farm Bureau chapters that I work with. But I also know that, as I mentioned earlier, you know, our relatively new president of Farm Bureau, Carl, who took Winwood's place, is the president of our ag board. He's been very supportive of the board and the work that it's doing, an advocate for the staff, for the funding. You know, I think it's a different era and an opportunity to have a different kind of conversation with Farm Bureau because their support is absolutely critical.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I have a quick
say
question.
one other thing, Lois, that I do want to accentuate your point. In those states that have robust farmland protection programs like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, et cetera, the Farm Bureaus absolutely love them, right? They might not have liked them at first, but once they get established, they love them because it provides, I mean, these are voluntary programs, right? So, and the way they sort of look at it and the way I like to talk to them about it is it gives landowners another option with their private property rights. I mean, right now, part of their private property rights are their rights to develop their property, but that right is useless if you don't actually develop it. It doesn't have a market value except to turn it into a house. If you have a program that'll buy those rights or some of them, then you're expanding the options that the grower has with those property rights. And I think that's an interesting sort of paradigm by which to talk about this, right? And, you know, I can't think of a state that's robustly funding farmland protection where Farm Bureau is not fully supportive. And in fact, you know, it's a lot of times the way they end up getting created is that, you know, Farm Bureau membership, for whatever reason, finally decides to ally themselves with someone historically like American Farmland Trust or whatever to start developing the infrastructure at the state level to fund those kinds of things. So I would I say, you know, if Farm Bureau is a ground up organization, start with your local folks and ask them to be vocal when it comes time to the annual, you know, for annual policy making and all that about this need for funding. And then once it's in the policy book, then I have actually something I can do, right? I can take that straight up to my friends at AFT in the policy department and say, hey, you know, here's what Michigan's Farm Bureau is saying about this issue.
Sounds like we better get you to light a fire under Farm Bureau officials to get the enthusiasm going.
Well,
They have the power to connect with the grassroots, but it's not getting done.
Well, I think, you know, again, it's starting with those local chapters and the folks you know there and telling them it's important to you.
Right.
I would only add that the president of our local Farm Bureau is our chairperson.
Right. Yeah, and it's
Right.
but you know, even that said, I haven't talked to Ed, but it's important for Ed to remember, man, when it comes time for local policy making, don't forget about this, right? We want it to end up in the policy book.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely, Brian. In fact, I'm just trying to think. I know that from our county, there's been a few of the, in the farmland preservation policy, there are a few items that have come out of this county that are in that now. And so you know, we're very well aware of it, but we're always open to new ideas too, and have those conversations.
Good, that's great to hear. And, you know, again, anything I can do to help, I'm happy to make connections with, we have a whole national policy team, as you can imagine, that's looking at these kinds of things and, may be able to find example policies from other state farm bureaus, for example, things like that. So let me know if there's any way I can help.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just had a question about strategy and how we scored things. We finally got an opportunity last fall to score some applications, and it was somewhat of a debate on whether we should be scoring higher for those properties that are more at risk of development versus ones that might be agriculturally more significant in some ways, but really not at risk of development just because of location or configuration. I was just kind of curious how, at the state level, you look at those for scoring.
Yeah, and again, I want to tell you that you all and Katie did a fantastic job in maximizing the points you have. And she made a very important point, which is that, and it comes back to the point I was talking about and why I chose not to monkey with slides for all of you, because it inevitably would fail. The point I wanted to make is that you have a tremendous amount of nationally significant farmland, because even where you have quote unquote poor soils, more than likely, you have a microclimate for fruit production. So it's either going to be classified by the USDA or certainly by AFT now, which we're looking at incorporating into our scoring system, because the new farms under threat work that AFT did over the last 5 years is so sophisticated, and it fully includes the USDA data. It just expands on it. But the point is, you have really great, you have farmland that's going to score really well. When it comes to development, again, I'm not looking at the scoring system right now. I know that proximity in certain ways, there's sort of this idea of a buffer, if you will, and what's the situation of that farm, right? And in fact, we incorporated that in our farms under threat study. For the first time ever, we measured what we called low density residential development, and which is sort of that rural death by 1,000 cuts that we all know happens, but we don't know how to measure it. So we came up with a way to measure it, I sent a summary report for Katie to get you all of that study, but I encourage you to go and look at the website, because if you look at that feature, like what we found in Michigan is, if land is in that area of low density residential, it's 11 times more likely to be lost over the last 15 years from agriculture. So we can finally prove, scientifically, that what I've seen up north, what you guys have seen in your backyard, is true. That as we start slowly dicing up the rural landscape, it results in loss. And it's just not as insidious or it's slow and insidious. It's not as obvious as a subdivision, right? But I think there's sort of, the way to think about that is the farm a gateway farm to an agricultural area, for example, right? Because what ultimately, I think, Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it gets measured by its proximity to other active ag land as well as other protected land. So we're looking, so it's sort of a nearness factor, if you, right?
Correct, yeah, and also if it's by, there's more points if you're closer to livestock, or, right? If you're
Yes.
closer to livestock and also to a drain or a water watershed of some type.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a number of factors, but I'm actually more of an expert at the scoring system in Acme Township because I developed it. So in that case, what we did was we tried to find the balance between in a buffer, it's a 1 mile buffer actually, what's the landscape look like there, right? Like how threatened is it by either those small splits or, you know, the amount of neighbors on any given side, or are those neighbors protected farmland, which significantly ups its point, right? Because you want to build on your success. Again, the whole idea being that, you know, the larger the block of protected farmland, the more likelihood that it's going to be viable in the future. And that's certainly what we see bear out in experience. So that's a general answer, but I think I think the real way to do it, and Kate did a good job, is to lay it right against the scoring system. But philosophically, I think I can see from your nods that you understand what I'm saying, right? It's really important to look at, you know, you may have a farm that's sort of on the edge of development, but it's very important because it's sort of protecting a gateway to the, I mean, if you just keep losing those, pretty soon you're just going to have erosion of the whole area, right? So making a mark in the sand is sometimes important. I can think of lots of instances of that in Leelanau County, for example, where we protected a keystone farm and it ended up, you know, really helping a whole area sort of stay intact. But I think also you want to look at, and it's kind of a balance between what we call development potential versus development pressure, because they're different, right? You know, what's the pressure the land likely facing or likely to face to be developed, and then, you know, what's its potential to be developed if it's not protected. And sometimes those are a little different. Like up north, one of the drivers, and maybe in your service area too, is views of water beat everything for developability. So, you know, because people want that view, it's harder to get the waterfront, right, as you all know, but if you can get the view of it, people will take that. And we found this interesting stat in a study we did in Leelanau where proximity to water and views of water trumped everything else when it came to land that ended up being converted, even when it didn't seem to make sense. Did that make sense at all?
Yeah, I'm the developer designee on this one, so that's why I'm asking these kind of questions. I mean, I just think the worst thing that's happened in the last 15, 20 years are a lot of the rural, municipalities thinking they're doing the right thing by pushing back development, by putting these 5-acre minimums in. But in essence, all they did is they made it 10 times worse because you've lost farmland by these chunks of 5 at a time.
I call them too big to mow and too small to farm.
Right.
I mean, we have perfect examples of that. And the other thing is, it's really like downsizing through zoning in a way. Like none of us that are sophisticated in any way at AFT and other places like that approach, right? It does not work.
Yeah.
It ends up basically, there's one, I could talk about forever, and I'm happy to talk to you offline if you'd like to about this issue, because I'm really happy that you're here. Because I think, there was just a fantastic article about Leelanau County farmland, and there was an interview with 2 realtors, very enlightened about, about the issue of if they don't retain the character of the county, it's not going to continue to be desirable in the way that it is right now. They have to be strategic about what they're working to do, right? And I also think that zoning's one tool. when we add tools like this to the mix, they can really change the options for landowners such that you don't get these silly sort of, large lot minimums that really don't contribute to anything positive. There's one case I heard of that happened that I thought was a brilliant change in that way, and it was in somewhere near Big Sky, Montana, where the entire county board, of course, was controlled by a handful of ranchers who downsized the county to the minimum lot size being one section. Because they all knew who owned everything, right? And they laid it out on the table and said, can everybody live with this? And they were like, yeah, we can live with this. And then they did that. Now that'll work, right? I mean, if you want to protect your ranch land, that'll work. But short of that, I mean, I've seen really disastrous results like you have from 10-acre and 5-acre minimums, where you're basically making people consume land in a way that it still results in the threats from non-farm neighbors to the agricultural community, and it sucks up and uses a bunch of land that's not necessary, right? So yeah.
Well, one last quick crazy idea, but instead of doing the purchase of development rights, could you? I mean, this is kind of the backwards way of it in some sense. Could landowners not sell their split rights? I mean,
Yes.
Create some type of a way that way, and then a developer could land bank those split rights and put them towards a property to get higher density.
And so of course somebody already thought of that, right? And it's called
Sure.
it's called the transfer of development rights commonly.
Okay.
It's alive and well in highly dense areas. So Maryland, for example, has a really great program. A number of the other New England states, and they're I know in the case of Maryland, they're totally open market run too.
Huh.
So the framework for the program is politically driven, right? But the trade is private. So as a developer, for example, you walk up to the farmer's store and the market's controlled by prevailing rate, and it's not always one-to-one either, right? It's I think in Maryland, depending on size, you get a certain amount of splits, and there's also a sending and a receiving area. That's what's crucial to those programs working. Now, what you can do, for the longest time, we couldn't even talk about it in Michigan because the zoning enabling act didn't allow it. What you can do now is within a given jurisdiction, like a township, I know you can have through, I think it's actually through like the PUD process, you can have that kind of an activity happen by creating a sending and receiving zone. Like I know Acme has this ability, it hasn't been exercised yet, where they can request essentially, there's still some oversight because it's new, right? But they can request that they're allowed to sell their density essentially, right? That's inherent in their land or some of it, and it can be put in the receiving zone. And the idea is to, and just like you said, the idea is to create a private market incentive to move that stuff where it belongs and compensate people properly.
Yeah.
So if again, another great resource American Farmland Trust has is our Farmland Information Center, which we've run for 25 plus years with the NRCS. And I'll send that address to Katie, but if you go there and just type in transfer of development rights, you'll start to get all the information you ever wanted. And you can that office now, it used to just be an online platform, but it's now staffed. So you can also call or you can leave a question online under the Ask the Expert and get what I would like to be able to help you get is a real example, right? Of, because we're talking about in the abstract, but about 10, 12 years ago, I went on a trip out east to tour properties and programs, and we stopped in Maryland at a development. And the presenter was not a farmer, it was the developer. And he was talking about how it worked for him because he was able to incorporate some more moderate income housing units in a sort of a town, like a traditional townhome style development, and where the facades looked all the same, et cetera, but he was able to make some more affordable units that were good for him on the bottom line, but also ended up creating sort of more diversity in terms of price range in the development, access for, you know, different kinds of folks, and he was super proud of it, you know, and really a champion of it. So I know that's going on in a number of places. Unfortunately, you got to have that density to work with, right? I mean, that's part of the challenge in the rural areas, is that it's a lot harder to figure out how to do it, right? Like up here, I see its future will be someday in relation to Traverse City, right? Where we just are, we got to incentivize denser development and more development that's affordable for people working downtown at Haggerty Insurance or whatever, right? And that would be a great way to do it, but we're going to have to connect, you know, intergovernmental agreements of some sort, so we can take, say, you know, outlying areas under threat of that kind of poor development, if you will, large lot development, and move it into town. But it definitely works, and I think there's a lot of room for creativity, and Michigan's now has enough opportunity that it's sort of, we're hungry for examples of, you know, how it can be done. And I think it's interesting that you can kind of do it as a really creative PUD, if you will, right? That involves more than one piece of property, right? All right, I know we're taking up a lot of your time, but I love having these kinds of discussions. I don't disappear after this. My job is to answer your questions, so feel free to send them to Katie, and she can forward them on to me. I'll make sure you get questions either answered through me or through the Farmland Information Center or other resources if I don't know the answer. But I think Katie knows from our discussions, I am very, very interested in helping you have success in Southwest Michigan, because as interesting as it, you know, as funny as it may sound to you, I cannot tell you how many discussions we've had about your region in Traverse City, because, you know, the idea of really making, I mean, we see an opportunity, some of us see an opportunity to talk about the fruit belt as an entire entity. So whether it's for the new regional partnership program that the USDA has through the NRCS or what have you, and the fact that we just historically have ended up with really strong land trusts doing farmland protection and with a lot of financial support in the Traverse area, but less so. It's not that the land trusts of West Michigan or Southwest aren't doing a great job. They're fabulous. And they support this. It's just that it's not in their mission, and they have a ton of other important work to do to protect your dunes and all those other things that matter. Right? So, but if there's anything we can do, you know, try to support getting more projects on the ground in your area, and like the Fruit Ridge outside of Grand Rapids, we just want to keep working on that. I think eventually there's going to be an opportunity to have a broader conversation about, you know, the fruit belt region, the nearshore region of Lake Michigan, because it's just so important. And I mean, face it, we got the water. So over time, you know, we're going to win. And we need to make sure those resources stay available for production. Any
Thank
other,
you.
any last questions? Otherwise, send them to Katie, please, while your brains are churning. And remember also, I know sometimes we have these discussions and someone doesn't want to bring up something because it's about their own property or their neighbor's property or something like that. I'm happy to talk to you about that as a land protection professional. Those conversations are in confidence. I don't share those with anybody. I've been doing that work for 20 something years. You know, I could never work with farm families if I didn't have discussions at the kitchen table that stayed at the kitchen table. So if there's anything that, you know, you might have wanted to talk about, but you don't want to have, you know, at an open forum like this, I'm happy to, you know, to weigh in on any questions you have that are more specific or personal about property. Shoot.
Yeah,
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Please,
Thank you.
I'll stay in touch with Katie for sure. And please think of any additional questions that you have. You guys have been a really, really fun group, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you. We appreciate your
Sounds
effort.
good.
Thank you.
You bet.
Bye-bye. What's that?
Move on to the next
Um,
topic. Just so people-
I was wondering if anybody has any free-ranging thoughts right on the tip of their brain right now, if they want to throw them out there so we don't lose them. So did everybody hear that? Is anybody have any free-ranging thoughts after Brian's presentation you want to just throw out there so they're not forgotten?
I guess the only thing I was pleased to see included parkland as part of the project.
Right, yeah. I think, so I will send you, if, I know, I think back over the summer, last summer, I sent the Farms Under Threat link and the report that was released. I will send that out again, as well as I also have the Michigan Department of Agriculture's their annual report on their environmental stewardship division for farmland preservation, which is specific to PA 116s that were applications that kind of just their metrics and information with how many applications were received, what went through, what's new acres that's enrolled in that program, and just kind of their program goals for this year. They also have these are 2-page reports, so they're not too lengthy, of the farmland conservation easements. So they're talking about the numbers that were approved last year and the funding round for this year. So that can, I will forward these on to you as well for your review, and as well as the information that Brian shares or forwards, but also the information we have already from the Farms Under Threat program and that project specifically. So I think the one thing I would just kind of to finish off that he has a wealth of knowledge, as you have heard. But the key thing I think to consider is that our PDR program is one tool of many that we've learned or kind of seen. And as you start to kind of really peel away all of the layers within very successful programs, and what you'll find is that it's an incorporation of all of the different tools that makes the program successful. And I think the one takeaway that when I first spoke with Brian was that in Old Mission Peninsula, they have, I think, 2 more properties to acquire, for purchase development rights. And the program's done, it's finished. There's nothing more to preserve. Everything, all the farmland is preserved. And the economic benefit from that is that there was a new, they had to do a sewer improvement And they had to go through, I think, or they had to do a drain. I think it was a drain improvement. So they had to go through their drain commissioner or the sewer, one or the other. They had to do a big public infrastructure project. And it saved the community thousands and thousands of dollars, or each individual taxpayer, thousands of dollars, because majority of these properties within that district didn't need to have the extension. They didn't need the sewer because it's farmland. So there was an actual connection to the long term. Here they have this vision. This is the area they were targeting for farmland preservation. They've succeeded in acquiring the properties, and the end result is it still saved the taxpayers money because they didn't have to pay for an assessment on a new septic or a new sewer system. So sometimes that's our intent. We go in this that way, but we forget it, and then you actually get to see it take, it makes sense. It all comes together, later, 20 years later, 10 years later. So I think that was, to me, very interesting and put it in perspective to some of the benefits, many of the benefits to farmland preservation.
Okay.
So the next thing on the agenda here is our PDR application round, which we will use the same format as we have in the past, which would be notifying all the municipalities, in general, notifying them of the program if they were interested in wanting to engage in conversations with us about farmland preservation, but also specifically sending notifications to those municipalities that are participating in the PDR program, those townships. And then we have, under our policies, is a 90-day application window. And I would just like to get your feedback as to last year we did it in the middle of June, I think, and so the application window was June through September. I would like to suggest that that the Land Preservation Board approve starting that application window a little bit earlier, so that if municipalities receive applications, and due to COVID and how people are meeting and when they do their meetings, that there would be enough time for the municipality to go through their review process and allow the application to come to the Land Preservation Board for review. And that way we have a good enough time frame to review the applications and be able to submit to the state when it's.
So what are you recommending?
Possibly either the middle of May or the 1st of June, the beginning of June.
It sounds
It just
wonderful.
puts it it gives us about an extra 3 to 4 weeks.
Sounds good.
But you need the board action.
I just need your consensus that we do the.
Even in the last part of April might work.
Sorry?
Even in the last part of April might work.
Yeah, I mean, we can send it out at the beginning of May, just so that way there's enough opportunity for the application to officially be open. We'll have the application available online at our county website, as well as we'll just notify all the municipalities.
Okay, so motion.
You need a motion for that, Katie?
Yes.
Sure.
Lois, you want to make it?
Sure. I move that we, pardon me?
I'll support that.
Go ahead. Okay, so everybody understands what we're doing. Authorizing Katie to move forward with the application round. Any further discussion? Jennifer, we need a roll call.
Yes. Foster,
Yes.
Kretschmann,
Yes.
Krieger,
Yes.
Marski,
Yes.
Hinkle.
Yes,
You have 5 yeas.
Okay, motion carries. Miscellaneous, anything to clean up?
At this point, no, I do not have anything.
Okay.
motion we adjourn.
Is there a support?
There is.
Adjourn? Okay.
Thank you all. I know this was a long one, but I hope it was worthwhile. Good work, good investment of your time.
Gives us some hope.
So we still
Yeah.
got a vote to adjourn now. Do we need a
Oh.
roll call on this?
Do we need a roll call on adjournment?
I haven't done it in any of my other meetings.
Okay,
thank you.
voice vote to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
I
Motion carries.
Thank you all.
Aye.
Thanks, guys.
See you all. Take care.